Welcome back to the Million Dollar Landscaper Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Molchan, and today we're going to be diving into one of the biggest challenges that's been going on in the landscape industry forever. Seems like my dad was having issues back when he started back in 1988. It is still continue on, and that is hiring laborers, hiring seasonal workers. Now, I know some of you are relying on the H-2B visas, and you probably know that the competition is just getting tougher on it. The rules are constantly changing. But what if I told you there is a strategy that can help you get workers easier without the stress? And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today with Nataly Mualem, who's an expert in H-2B visas. And she today is going to be kind of breaking down some of the updates, some hiring strategies, and how some landscapers are using what she calls the October strategy to kind of get ahead of the game. So if you're really struggling to find workers or worried about the upcoming season, this episode's for you. So let's kind of dive in. So Nataly, welcome back. Thank you for being on the show again.
No, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
So Nataly, for those that aren't familiar with you, and then I was looking up this morning. It's kind of hard to believe it's been 5 months already since you were on here last. But just kind of give a background, a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So I'm an immigration attorney. I've been one for about 8 years and really focused on the H-2B program. It's the primary practice area in my small little boutique firm. I'm based in Cleveland, Ohio, and I started practicing immigration because my family were immigrants as well. I came here when I was very young at 5 years old, but our journey was very long, and I got to learn along the way with my parents as we navigated it and made it through. And when I finished law school, I gravitated towards immigration because of that background, and I've been practicing business immigration ever since.
Nice, nice. And I know you've actually been helping out some of our people that are in our program, and it's been really great to hear their experiences with you. So thank you for all of that.
No, absolutely.
Now, one of the things I know you and I were talking about before we hopped on the podcast is what you call the October strategy. So would you mind kind of explaining what that is and why we have to kind of wait till October? What's that whole thing about?
Absolutely. So, the way to kind of keep this in mind is with the H-2B visa, there are two buckets of visas that we can access. They're all given in a fiscal year. So, there's 66,000 visas a year, but they're not all released at once. They are released in two batches. And kind of the tricky part here is October 1 is considered the beginning of the year. So, the government will issue 33,000 minimum visas a year in October and then 33,000 in April. And obviously we apply before, but that is the start date. What happens is because October is not the traditional season or the beginning of the season for many companies that participate in H-2B, whether we're talking about landscaping, construction, hospitality, they typically are looking after those spring visas. So the October cap is a lot less competitive. But since it's the beginning of the fiscal year, anybody that you bring in October is actually exempt for that whole year. So any job that begins before September 30th of that fiscal year, you can use that same worker and they're completely exempt from the cap. So while everybody's competing in April and you have about a 24.5% chance of making it into Group A, your workers can be completely exempt and you're on a different playing field. In October, the chances are over 90% of you making the cap. And that's without actually even having the supplemental. With a supplemental, chances are almost, guaranteed for an October 1 filing. If that happens, we don't know, which way that will go this year. But even without it, you're looking at, almost a 90% chance of making the cap versus a 24 and a half, maybe 30% chance with spring. So it really gives you a really, large competitive edge if you're able to utilize that strategy.
So for those that don't really have work that goes along after October or very little work, is this something that's kind of really useful for them, or can they allow other people to use them? How does that all kind of work?
Sure. So there's a few things we typically do. The first thing is we can have a subset season. So let's say your season ends in December and you really just stop working, whether it's December 1 or December 30th, whatever, your season happens to be. You can have the workers for that small sliver of time and they're still exempt. You could also work
Okay.
with companies that have an opposite season of you. So I've had instances where, we find a company that does snow cleaning, they really need the help. We work together, we maybe supplement some of the costs for them getting the H-2B workers in the winter, and then we have that exemption going on for us in the spring. So there's quite a bit that we can do. We usually, most companies will have the workers come for at least a part of the season working with them, even in the like fall season is what we call it, the October season. So they'll come and they'll do like October, November, for example, or even a few weeks in October and leave. Or let's say you don't really need them in October, but you need snow cleaners or you need somebody to hang up Christmas lights. We could use it for that. It's anytime from October till March. Usually the visas run out before, so we want to try to keep the application in the early part of the fall, at least start at that point. And if we can do any of that, then your workers are exempt. But like I said, sometimes, like let's say you're in Florida or you're in, South Carolina. Well, we can maybe, create a relationship between you and a company that's in Ohio or Michigan or Connecticut, and use the workers that way as well. So there's quite a bit we can do. The kind of key thing about this is the exemption runs with the worker and not the company. So it's not like company A has 5 spots they use in October. That means in April they'll have 5 spots. It's those 5 individuals that they bring in are exempt for the next season. So we can switch around companies, we can switch around positions, we can really work with that, and we have a lot of options depending on your company's needs. But the best case scenario is you need at least a little bit of work starting in October.
Gotcha. And I guess, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on the H2B, but are people typically not taking advantage of the October strategy, like you said, just because they don't know about it, or just because they're fearful if they don't have the work? What are you kind
So
of finding on your end?
I would say about 85% of clients don't know about October. And it's because there's, with H2B, there's a lot of like big box H2B processors. So they do things in just the traditional sense, kind of like, I almost call it assembly line processing, where everybody gets the same treatment. But when you really dig down and talk to the companies, you'd be surprised how many have at least a little bit of a need. And I think there's always confusion about, well, I have landscapers already that, are with me till December. Does that mean I can't have landscapers in October? And we've argued a peak within a peak, for example. We've argued subsets. We've done janitorial snow cleaners so that they're not just cleaning snow. Because I get that question a lot of like, what if it doesn't snow? Well, we build the job description to be a little bit wider than that so that you have more flexibility and you're able to maybe bring this janitorial snow cleaner to do leaf removal if it's not snowing, or do mulching, or do maintenance on small equipment, or small maybe construction site removal, waste removal. So there's quite a bit we can build into the job descriptions, and we have to be very careful. But what it takes is an individualized strategy, and that's why most companies that do H-2B processing that maybe don't have that personal touch, or don't have the attorney oversight on every case, shy away from the October strategy, because it is more work to figure out what works for each company. It's a very tailored, not it's not a one size fits all plan. And then the other 15%, maybe they don't want to spend money on the additional application in October, or maybe they don't want to, like you said, maybe guarantee the work. But I would say that's the minority of cases. And when people find out that, you're basically buying an insurance plan, is how I put it. So if you have work in October, it's seasonal, it works for you, we're doing everything by the book, your data actually shows that need, then what you're purchasing is really, that cost of the visa for October. It's an insurance policy for you in April when everybody else is scrambling. You are, sleeping soundly, not worried about the CAP results, unlike all the other people competing in October.
Yeah, that's a very smart move on landscaper side to take advantage of this program. So when should they start applying for this? When should they start reaching out to people like you to kind of get the process going?
Sure. So we typically start processing October visas in April and May. So we submit the first part
Okay.
of the process, that's the prevailing wage. May 1st is usually like the latest we try to go. We can get the process started earlier, obviously. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get that back. The reason I like starting in April if we can is like, or even maybe very early May if we can. Let's say the wage comes back too high, we don't want to pay that. We can then, maybe submit something else and look for other alternatives. If we wait until June, then whatever wage you get, you have to either use or forgo. So we typically like starting April or May, and then we actually submit our actual petition, the TLC or the temporary labor certification. We'll submit that on the first couple days of July. So usually it's July 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or sometimes 3rd, 4th, 5th, depending on what 90 days happens to be given the individual year. But we will submit your application then, and then you'll hear back relatively soon for the October visas. So we typically know whether you're going to get workers or not that week. And then we will then, obviously go through the process to see if your application is approvable or not. And we have a response back before the middle of August. So it's a relatively quick process. That's the nice thing about H-2B is you don't have to wait years like a lot of the other processes. And you do get, ability to sometimes file for supplemental caps as they become available as well.
Gotcha. So yeah, if you guys are out there listening, we need to take advantage of this and start getting on this very, very soon to kind of plan your season out and think and look at how, what's it look like for your business? How is it going to be in October? You're going to be busy, you're doing outdoor kitchens, it's kind of slow, whatever you're doing, start planning ahead and thinking about this. And do you need workers? And then reach out to Nataly to kind of get this process going. It's something like anything else. You just got to be proactive on it. Correct?
Exactly. And honestly, like there's the companies that end up in the best situation for H2B are those that have a long-term plan and a short-term plan. So, you can call me and we can get you workers this season, but what we usually do and something I think that kind of sets us apart is we do look at each case and we set a long-term, like let's say a year plan, 2-year plan, and we work with you to kind of minimize those hiccups because when you first get started, it's not pretty. There's a lot of anxiety about it of like, do I get workers? Do I not? What happens? So I like starting in October because it removes a lot of that, but also, helps us build out so that the next season you're stable. What are we going to do next fall? And over time, you'll see that you'll need less and less applications and you will have more stability. So I have some companies where we've gotten them to the point where they have workers year round doing 2 different positions. Anytime in the year they need workers, they can call on them and they're there within weeks. We have a really good reserve of workers for them. And it's become a very smooth and sufficient process where they're not, it's kind of, you're not subject to those ups and downs like everybody else. And you have your workforce stable. And I actually had a funny story with one of my clients this month where all of a sudden he had more visas than he knew what to do with. So I'm like, wait, this is a good problem. We're going to share it with all these other clients that didn't get as lucky. But we've definitely want to look long term and work on long term plans as well as just the short term solutions. And you're not committing to anything. When I say that, I'm not saying we have to put applications in and do everything and pay for it or anything like that. But we just kind of create a plan for you to minimize the disruptions that sometimes come with H-2B.
Gotcha. So if somebody's really interested in doing this and reaching out to you, I guess I know we kind of get it a little bit later, but what are the things they need from you to kind of get this process started? What information, what
Sure.
type of thing do they need?
Absolutely. So the first thing we're going to talk about if you call me is, let's talk about your season. So tell me what you do, where you're located. Do you actually have ups and downs? What kinds of positions do you have? Maybe sometimes people work year round, but they're doing, leaf cleanup for part of the year, or they're doing irrigation, or, like you said, outdoor kitchens, Christmas lights. And we kind of try to compartmentalize the different jobs to see if we can come up with one job or a couple jobs that are actually truly seasonal. If that is the case, then we'll start talking about what evidence you have of that. How does your payroll look? How does your revenue look for the year? Can we do a monthly breakdown? Really, we kind of like work together to have the strongest application. And then we talk about what you pay your workers. So I've had a few people call before, and the reason they couldn't do it is just, the prevailing wage is just higher than they typically pay. And that's perfectly fine. We can, kind of estimate that to a very good certainty on the onset and just know if you're a good fit or not. And we'll talk about that as well. And then we will talk about your, your hiring practices. Like, are you okay with having a purely seasonal workforce? How does that look for you? Do you want your workers year round doing different things? Do you just want them for a couple months out of the year? And we kind of get through all those details. Once we have all that down, then we will begin your prevailing wage process, which is what actually finalizes what your prevailing wage will be. So we can look up that data online, access the surveys that they use, but this is what actually gives us the concrete number then we can rely on. So we will ask for your FEIN, your locations, confirm the job description, and then submit that. It's, takes a few minutes from the employer. It's not very, difficult to do. We have a lot of good template job descriptions and we can work off of those. So it's not, it's not very difficult. Once we have that, then we will start collecting the information like your payroll, your monthly revenue report, any contract summaries you have, and start drafting your statement of need. And a statement of need is kind of like our narrative, our story. We kind of tell, the story of why we're seasonal, why we need 10 workers, for example. And we get that all together and get it ready for the submission. So really, up to that point, it's a lot of communication between us. And then once we submit, depending on if we're talking about October or April, we wait for those lottery results and then we respond to anything the Department of Labor has asked of us. So sometimes they just let the application through. They're fully satisfied with it, no questions asked. Sometimes they have a few questions about, show us why you're seasonal, or you said you need 10 workers. Why is that? And they ask for a little bit more information. Once that's approved, then we go through a 15-day period of recruitment in the United States. Our office will work with you to make sure that we take all the steps, and you interview any US candidates that come out of that, and then you get your certification. And that's the certification. I fondly call it the permission slip, because that's really what it is. The Department of Labor is giving you permission to seek workers. It doesn't get you anything by itself, but if the cap is open, then we move on to the other agency, which is the Department of Homeland Security. We submit our application there, and that's how you reserve the workers. So once you have a receipt from the Department of Homeland Security, that's your receipt for saying, like, I've reserved 5, 10, 15 workers, depending on your case. And then we move on to individually, processing the workers. So we collect their information, we book them an appointment at their nearest consulate, and shortly after, you'll have work here. You'll have actual laborers here,
Nice.
and from start to finish, it's a few months. And what you're providing us mostly is documentation, and then we take care of a lot of the other steps. And then once they get here, we do a small check-in process. So we make sure they have, all the documents that they need, that you've paid the fees that you have to pay for them, and that everybody's on the same page when it comes to salary, overtime, all of that. Just make sure everybody's on the same page, and then you kind of go from there. You treat them basically almost like any other worker for the most part.
I know we talked about this in our last podcast episode, but once they have the workers here, what is the responsibility of the employer as far as like housing and stuff like that? What does the employer have to provide or do?
Sure. So when it comes to H-2B, most of the obligations are met, before the workers get here. You have to pay for transportation to get them to the US and then transportation back. Once they get here, you're not obligated to do anything special except for you have to help them get a social security card if they don't have one, which could be, basically allowing them time off and maybe a ride to the social security office. Other than that, you treat them just like any other employees. Most companies will opt for housing just because the idea is, like, somebody's foreign, they don't know the area, they don't know how much it's going to cost. So it's hard to recruit when, there's so many unknowns. If you're recruiting from within your own workforce, like let's say you have a foreman who is from Mexico and he's helping you bring in people, that might make it less necessary, because then your foreman can tell them a little bit, and they trust him and they know him, and they can like maybe share some resources. But let's say you don't have anybody, this is your first batch of people that are not, just US workers, and you're bringing somebody over. If you do provide housing for clarity, or to just give people peace of mind, or to remove that logistical hassle, what you can do is deduct that cost of the housing from their paycheck. And we have to be upfront about what that cost is. But once we do that, then it's perfectly fine to deduct it. And usually we want to keep accommodations. I typically describe it as like a dorm room. So we want to keep it nice, keep it clean, keep it, basic as well. So we don't want to have something too extravagant where it's too much of their paycheck. And we don't want to have something that, like let's say like a college kid wouldn't want to live in. So minimum accommodations, but nice and clean. And whatever that costs you, you can deduct it from the paycheck. And you can include like utilities. If you're providing meals, you can, deduct that. Most companies don't do that though with the meals, but they do the rent and utilities out of the paycheck.
We want to take a quick second to tell you about our friends over at Cycle CPA. I can't even express to you how important it is to have a good accountant on your side. You know you want accurate bookkeeping and financial statements every month. Instead, you're often left with limited time to focus on the accounting side of your business and no reports to show for it. At Cycle CPA, the landscaping accountants, they not only handle the bookkeeping, but also provide landscape industry benchmarking, job costing, financials by service line, advisory meetings, and much more. Cycle CPA has a team of landscaping accountants available to provide anything from bookkeeping to CFO services. Visit cyclecpa.com and for $100 off, mention the $1 Million Landscaper podcast.
Want to grow your business and get more customers fast? Then it's time to talk about pay-per-click advertising from Green Frog Web Design. With PPC, your business can appear right at the top of the search results, putting you in front of the customers who are already looking for your services. Whether it's landscaping, home improvement, or retail, Green Frog's expert team will create targeted, high-performing ad campaigns that deliver real results. No wasting money, no guessing games, just more leads and more sales. And the best part, Green Frog handles everything for you, from keyword research to ad design to optimization, so you can focus on what you do best, running your business. If you're ready to leap ahead of your competition, visit greenfrogwebdesign.com today or just click the link in the bio. Start driving traffic, generating leads, and growing your business like never before.
I know you and I were talking before about how the H-2B has just been increasing competition. What do you feel is really driving that? What's kind of pushing that right now?
Sure. I think it's multiple factors. So the first factor is I think, overall just less and less people want to work in the fields that, most H-2B employers happen to be in. And I think it's maybe a generational shift, maybe it's a, value shift, but there has just been less interest in obtaining these jobs, which maybe historically were a little bit more, more interesting to the average American. And then, in addition to that, there has been obviously a lot of media about this, but with the government crackdowns, in landscaping and in construction, a lot of times those industries relied on undocumented workers or, basically workers that were here in one way or another undocumented. So what happens is, now all of a sudden you have a lot more scrutiny. And I've had companies call me where their workers have either self-deported, where they are just afraid to show up to work, where they have maybe are showing up to work but are putting a notice and are saying, we're not going to be here, or we're going to do something else, or we want to stay under the radar, or workers that are actually in deportation proceedings, or something like that's happened. So whether how you feel about that is kind of irrelevant here. It's happening, and there's a lot of media buzz around it. So a lot of times it's the workers themselves, from what I'm seeing, that are just kind of taking themselves out of the equation. So companies are calling me and they're saying, we no longer feel confident in relying on that as a source of labor, whether their workers are here or not. We need a backup plan. We need a plan B. We need something that is more legitimate, that we can, kind of hang our hat on. And that happens to be H-2B. And I'm sure that's happening with offices across the country, and it's happening with companies across the country. So what that means is there's going to be even more push for H-2B, because that's the only viable option right now for companies that need workers now, and that those workers are not those jobs don't require a bachelor's degree or some sort of a higher education, then you can use those other visa programs. So that is the only immediate solution for many companies. And even last year, we noticed before this administration that in the January filings that happened for April, there was an 8% increase in the total amount of workers requested. So, that's a pretty sizable increase when the program is already so strained. Part of that could be, inflation in the numbers. So, it doesn't mean that there'll be more people actually coming in or more people needed. Sometimes companies apply more because they want more chances, but it could very well mean also that there's just a bigger need and more competition. The other thing that's happening is more industries are kind of becoming wiser to the fact that H-2Bs exist. So traditionally, it was always landscaping, construction, hospitality, maybe some manufacturing. Now we have meat processors, for example, that are taking up 8 to 10%. I have hair salons, nail salons, nannies, quite a bit of diversity. And when those other industries or other fields are joining, of course, it's going to push, kind of push the demand on the visas as well and make it more difficult. So that's why it's more important than ever to be resourceful. And I think with these exemptions, with October, for example, or maybe using the supplemental cap if it comes out to the best of our advantage, we can remain competitive even though there's a bigger push towards the visas.
Do you kind of, I mean, we're just kind of forecasting here, but do you think there would be a increase in the amount of visas that are going to be allowed because they are cracking down on the need for this and the higher growth of the program?
So I do think there's going to be a supplemental cap. That is purely speculative. I can't guarantee it, obviously, but I do think there's going to be a supplemental cap. There was a supplemental cap under the first Trump administration, so it's not unheard of. And like you said, there's something's got to give, right? So we can't tell
Mhm.
companies you're not allowed to use undocumented workers, but we're also going to limit the number of documented workers that you have. And I think everybody recognizes, and they have for decades now, that the H-2B program is very limited and it's too limited. So the cap was set in the 1990s. So obviously the country's grown, the demand has grown, priorities have shifted, our labor has shifted. A lot more jobs exist now that didn't exist in the 90s that people are taking. So there's been a lot of change, but the H-2B program limits have not changed. And I think to change it, you need congressional involvement, and that's not going to happen. And, at least now, I don't think that's going to happen. So I think what will continue to happen, though, is revisions to how the program's applied. So, for example, in the past, and this has been quite a while now, but in the past, there's been exemptions where anybody who had an H-2B visa within the last 3 years is automatically exempt. So something like that they could create where they're carving out exemptions from the cap, or they could have a supplemental cap like they have for the past couple of years. What's been nice about the last 2 years is the supplemental cap was released in October. So we knew for that entire year how those visas were going to be allocated, and we knew how to plan around them. But previously, what happened was they would release visas, but it would be like, let's say the cap is met in March. Then after the cap is met, they'd wait, 3, 4, 5 weeks, and then they'd say, we're having an announcement, we're going to increase the number. And then they'd say, we'll release the forms when we're ready. And then it would take another 2, 3 weeks. So you were getting your workers in July, August, which, some companies were like, that's fine. I'll take them when I can. But now the nice thing is like for companies that are in group B, C, D, they can practically get their workers in April, maybe not April 1, but still, sometime in April, because we know ahead of time this is when the visas will be released. So they say, whenever the cap closes, 15 days later, those visas are going to be available. And we know that we can kind of hit the ground running with that and use those right away. So it's been nice to have that predictability and for companies to know how many visas are going to be available and when they're going to be available. I've talked to the NALP before, and I know they're working very hard on securing a deal with the Trump administration so that we can have something similar for October. But of course, nobody knows how that's going to play out or when we'd hear the announcement. Probably wouldn't be until October or November that we'd know for sure.
Gotcha. So I guess with there being so much competition to get these workers and how hard it is, uh, Are green cards an option for people? Is this something that landscapers can take advantage of to sponsor a green card, or is that not really a thing?
No, absolutely it is. And it's something that we've seen an increase in because, kind of like the long-term thinking companies have said enough is enough. We have been doing H-2B for so many years and we need another solution. And what we've done is kind of started those companies on a perm process. And what perm is, it's basically the underlying permanent labor certification that is needed for the green card. There are definitely drawbacks to that process, and I'm happy to go into them. But the benefit of it is it's a one time solution. So if you actually find the right fit, the worker is somebody that you want, and you're actually able to successfully go through the process, that worker becomes a US worker and they can work for you year round, however you need them, seasonally, not seasonally, whatever works. And the drawbacks of that are twofold. The first one is that you have to actually trust the worker will stay. So once they get their green card, they're a US worker. And, there's definitely different levels of loyalty there or different levels of, job satisfaction that could play into that and determine whether the worker stays or leaves. Usually you have 6 months after the green card where you're heavily scrutinized if you leave the job. And then afterwards it's, you're just like anybody else. So it's a long process too, which is the second hard part about this. So usually it takes 4 to 5 years from start to finish to get a green card under the EB3 category. So most companies will do this in unison with the H-2B process. And recent laws have said, or regulations have said, there's the non-immigrant intent of H-2B will not be harmed if you have a green card process in the background happening. There's been some instances where, there's been kind of buzz about can you have non-immigrant intent and have a green card, and they've basically cleared that up for H-2B and said, and H-2A as well actually, and said, we will not use it against you, knowing the process is so long and knowing that you will maintain your H-2B status until you get to that final stage of the perm process. So as long as you have a group of workers that you're confident in and that you're able to still do H-2B in the meantime so that you get your immediate needs met, it's a great long-term plan. And it's overall, the cost of it is obviously higher than H-2B, but, obviously it's kind of a one-time solution. So you're not paying seasonally for that cost. And for most companies, it ends up being worth it. But usually they want to meet the workers first, try them out, use them for H-2B for a few seasons. And once you've built up that confidence, then you move on to the green card process.
So I guess, would you mind just going in a little bit, like if they're interested, they found the workers, they've been working with them for a while. What's kind of the process to kind of get started with that?
Sure, absolutely. So it's very similar to H-2B, but like just amplified. So you go through the prevailing wage process, same as you do with H-2B, but it takes a longer time for the DOL to make a decision. So instead of it taking, like 5, 6 weeks, it's going to take 6, 7, 8, 9 months for them to come up with that. Once you have your prevailing wage, we start advertising. And the additional thing here is you do have to do 2 Sunday ads. So that means whatever your local paper is, we want to do 2 consecutive Sunday ads in your local paper. And then after you do the advertising, there's a 30-day cool off period. That means you allow people, you kind of run the ad for 30 days, done all the other, recruitment pieces that we typically do for perm. And then you have to give people a chance to actually apply by waiting 30 days. Once that's done, you take your candidates, and for each one you file a perm is what it's called, and it will include all the details of the job as well as the details of the candidate and match up the job experience requirements. If you have somebody that came to you with zero experience and then it's built up, we do need to change the job a little bit for that to qualify. But if somebody has experience in the past, we can just apply their past experience, and we file for the perm. If the perm isn't audited, it will take another 9, 10, maybe 12 months. If you do have an audit, it could even take longer. And audits, part of them are random, but there's also some, certain language that you can put that would trigger an audit. Once that's approved, we have the I-140, which is the petition to the Department of Homeland Security for the immigrant labor. Again, we're going to match up those details to show this person qualifies for the minimum standards we've set, but also show that our company has the ability to pay the wage. So let's say we're offering $35,000 a year, then we have to show that, within our operating budget, we have $35,000 to spare. And then lastly, once that's done, depending on if the worker is in the US or out of the US at the time of the I-140 approval, we either go with consular processing in their home country or we do an adjustment of status in the United States. So most companies would probably prefer an adjustment of status, but sometimes, the way the timing works, we'd have to do consular processing and, get the immigrant visa there. And then at that point, the person has their green card. And obviously this is, simplified, but that's generally the process. And, between these steps, you're wait, from start to finish, you're talking about 4 to 5 years to get there, because there's also a cap on those visas. So it's not like the H-2B cap where you either make it or you don't. You're put in a queue, and every month they will release, the top of that queue, and then everybody else has to wait, and it kind of moves up until you get your turn as well. But, generally speaking, 4 to 5 years from start to finish, and the worker becomes a U.S. green card holder. After 5 years, they can actually obtain citizenship as well.
Gotcha. So I guess kind of going back to the H-2B a little bit.
Sure.
You know, if you want to, you find a worker that's doing pretty good and you want to have that worker come back again and then, possibly down the road, maybe get to the green card status, but can you apply to get that same worker that you had the previous year?
Yes.
Okay.
So especially with October, because the worker is exempt, you can definitely get them. If you're doing an April filing, April after April, sometimes your worker might not qualify. Let's say you're in group like G or F and your worker doesn't qualify for the returning worker supplemental cap, you might not be able to get that same person again. But generally speaking, if you do, if you either place pretty high on the lottery for April, or if you do October, then yes, you do get the same workers over and over. And I would say about 85% of my companies do end up using substantially the same workers year after year.
That's good. Well, it's probably another reason to take advantage of the October strategy, like you said.
Yes, absolutely. It builds that certainty into the program.
Yeah. So I know with, the change in government and the different legal things, is there any big legal issues that have come out and policies that have changed the program itself?
Sure. So this is actually not part of this administration. This was effective January 17th, but it's being litigated right now. There's been H-2B modernization rules, and some of them are very positive. So, for example, there is more flexibility in porting a worker from one location to another. After the person's visa ends, they have 30 days instead of 10 to find a new job or to transfer to a new job, or even stay with their same company but wait for that certification. So those types of changes have been positive, but there's been a really added emphasis on I would call it like enforcement and on compliance. And what that's done is it's created a system that penalizes companies that have been non-compliant in the past. So it hasn't happened to any of my clients, but I've seen those notices of intent to deny from other attorneys where they have said, because you've been found non-compliant in the past, we're not going to accept your application. So that's currently being litigated. The National Association of Landscape Professionals, the NALP, is filing a lawsuit against that change. And they're saying that it's basically targeting those companies and blacklisting them. So we don't know how that's going to play out, obviously, in the lawsuit. But the idea is, if you have been found non-compliant in the past, it's going to make it harder. If you're generally a company that is in compliance, it will make it easier for you. So there's been a little bit of, depending on which side of the spectrum you fall on, some companies are in favor, some companies are not. But generally the kind of notion is we do want those added flexibilities, but we do not want companies to be blacklisted for forever. And there's a little bit also of kind of uncertainty of what defines the company. I mean, if you open up a new LLC, are you new, or are they going to look at the management, or what really defines a company, especially with smaller companies that, it's probably, there's a lot of wiggle room there on establishing a new corporate identity. So a lot of that, we don't know how it will play out, but for new filers, it shouldn't really affect them yet. This is more for people that are veterans of the program and maybe have had issues in the past when it comes to audits or wage and hour, or they've been found non-compliant for one reason or another.
I guess, can you elaborate a little bit on what could cause somebody to be blacklisted? What, as far as compliance side of things?
Absolutely. So some things are like, let's say that we are petitioning for landscapers, and then an audit happens, or a worker says, we're actually not doing landscaping, we're doing concrete construction, or we're doing, you know, what have you, that falls into a different job category. That would be a reason to be blacklisted. Or you're not paying whatever the wage that is on the petition. So let's say your wage came back to be $18 an hour and you're paying 16, and there's no reason for that $2 difference. Or we could have instances where you're saying somebody is in Cleveland, Ohio, but you have them in Detroit, Michigan, and the difference is the wages are different. So you're paying them a wage somewhere where you should be paying them in other locations' wages. Or sometimes it could be you get audited and you're not keeping enough records of payments. So we've had situations where companies have done cash payments, and there's really no way to prove how much they've paid if they've just been withdrawing cash and doing it that way. So we work with our employers to make sure that doesn't happen. But there's quite a bit of things that you could do wrong, some intentional, some non-intentional. But I would say the majority of those things, the DOL is not always reasonable. They're not always fair. But most of the things that are unintentional usually don't result in that like debarment or major consequence for the company. You get a little slap on the wrist, a little kind of don't do it again, here's what you should do better, but it doesn't end up to the point of being blacklisted from the program.
Gotcha. So I guess, I know you said worked with some of our clients that work with us, and they've been struggling trying to get people, and I'm not going to go down why,
Sure.
but what has caused people to not get workers from the side? Is it applications, or what caused them not to get them?
Sure. So, there's honestly, there's quite a bit of reasons. I think there's, like let's say the medium case, not worst case scenario, is you applied, you didn't make the cap, your application went through, it was fine. There was just no strategy behind it, right? Like you just kind of had one shot in the dark, kind of, and just basically didn't make it. There was no backup plan, no advocacy done on the representative's part, and you just kind of, you're out that money, but you don't have anything else negative that's attached to you. The worst, or I would say definitely worst side of that, or the worst case scenario, would be you are represented by somebody that is not well versed in H-2B, and what happens is you actually get a denial, and that denial now is on your record. It's not impossible to come back from. We've done it before, and sometimes denials are unfair and there's no reason for them. But I've also seen, and we talked about the example where one of your listeners contacted me and sent me the application that was filed on their behalf, and I, was, I think the word for it was like shocked at how it was done. There, it's very unfortunate, but it just said something along the lines of like, our business is seasonal. It's seasonal because of the weather. Like it was just absolutely not how you approach these applications. So in that case, this person now has a few denials on the record. And what you need to do is advocate even harder and show that, there's quite a bit of information that wasn't presented the first time, and you have to present that case to the DOL in that matter. So I think that's the boat that you don't want to be in, for sure. Always research who's doing your H-2B applications, see what their qualifications are, find out how long they've done it, and you could look at their record of success as well, and judge for yourself if that's somebody that you will feel confident going with, and make sure that you are looking at their practices, looking at, how they run things. Do you feel comfortable around this person? Look at their payment terms. All of those are important factors. But I think most companies probably that have not had success fall in that first camp of, we did the bare minimum, we got you approved, and then you just didn't make it. And sometimes that's the answer. Like if you're only going to apply once and you're only going to do it in the spring and you're not open to other ideas and you only want people from certain countries, you might not get your workers. Like that's a completely fair and valid reason. But if you're willing to kind of be more creative and think outside the box, there's usually a few solutions there for you that could definitely increase your chances very much when it comes to H-2B.
Awesome. Well, Nataly, this has been super helpful and very informative. Is there anything else you'd like to add that landscapers need to think about or understand with what's going on, or anything that we need to
Yeah,
talk about here?
absolutely. I think, kind of far away from H-2B, but I think this is something that, everybody should have in their mind. I would take a little bit of time and review your records, look at your practices, audit yourself internally, make sure that, everything is in good shape, because there is more scrutiny now and there is going to continue to be more scrutiny. And probably, it kind of started with the ice raids. There might be now more I-9 audits. So just look at your practices, make sure everything is up to date, look at your records, reach out to somebody reputable that you trust, and go through your documents if you don't know how to do it internally, and just make sure that everything is in top working order for in case of something happening. And I think, spending a little bit of time to give yourself that peace of mind and that insurance is definitely worth it. And I would encourage every company, regardless of your size, to do that. And if you need help with labor, then reach out sooner rather than later, and let's see if we can work on some strategies for you. And otherwise, I think just kind of adhere to best practices right now, for sure. And that applies in every administration. We never know what's going to happen or when, but there has been notably higher scrutiny going on right now. So definitely keep that in mind as you make decisions for your business.
So, Nataly, if somebody's interested or needs some help or needs some advice on how to get started, how can they get hold of you?
Absolutely. So the best way is my website. It's mualemfirm.com, Mualem firm, firm.com. You can also reach me by phone at 216-312-4700, or you can email us at info@mualemfirm.com as well.
Nice. So, guys, too, I want to let everybody know that Nataly's going to be joining me, and we're going to be doing a Facebook and YouTube live. It's going to be happening March 25th. It's 4 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Central time. And she'll be hopping on, kind of going over a little bit of the stuff that we talked about today, and be available to answer any questions you guys have. So we encourage you to join us on March 3rd, or I'm sorry, March 25th. And we'll have the link in the description below. But it's going to be a great opportunity to kind of interact with Nataly and get your questions answered that you've been thinking about this program. Nataly, it has been great having you back on here again. It's just very helpful because there's so many updates and, like you said, so many changes going on in the world right now that we need to be aware of these things. So I appreciate being on here again today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, thank you, Nataly. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to Nataly anytime. We'll have all her information down in the description too. So thank you, Nataly, and hope you guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.